I watched it for the plot. You have probably heard this statement before, most likely in regards to something like High School ED or some other ecchi show. And as someone who has seen a lot of shows with tons of fan service, I have to say I don't always get this sentiment. It makes sense with something like Food Wars. The foodgasms don't take up much of the show, and the main focus of the show are the titular Food Wars. The boobs are just a bonus. But with something like Trinity 7, the plot is barely existent, and the magic system isn't really fleshed out. But it has a ton of fan service, so I can excuse a half-baked plot. But both of those series aren't what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to discuss is a manga with a compelling plot and tons of fan service. In fact, the plot is so well thought out that it makes me wish the fan service would go away entirely. This is Parallel Paradise. Parallel Paradise opens up with our main boy Yota Tada daydreaming in class about his childhood crush Nishina. You know, the usual. But outside, a strange puppet-looking creature appears. Yota notices it, but before he can do anything, it suddenly appears from behind and defenestrates him. As Yota falls, a strange womanly figure appears, and then he wakes up in a jungle. But this is no ordinary jungle, because our boy has been isekai'd. There is a big castle, dragons, and 2 moons. While Yota comes to the realization that he is not on Earth, a girl finds him. This girl is Lumi, a paladin from a nearby city. But once Yota talks, Lumi freaks out, because Yota is a man. And after Yota touches Lumi, we find out what this series is. This manga is going to be hard to talk about on YouTube, and it is pretty gross, so I'm sorry for all the censorship and also the contents of this series. After being touched, Lumi starts to get wet, profusely. In fact, it is to a level that I think should be physically impossible, but this is a fantasy world, and I'm not an expert on the subject, so I guess I can get a pass. But before we can get some answers, the two are attacked by a dragon. Yota attempts to use his kendo skills to beat the dragon, but it's a dragon, and he is just a dude. So Yota gets saved by Lumi, and afterwards Lumi pins Yota to the ground and smothers him with hugs, kisses, and licks. We then get some exposition from the dinky, pigeon-looking god called Genius that is accompanying Lumi. According to Genius, this world has no human men, and then Genius instructs Yota to have sex with Lumi. And then they do. What? Disappointed to see me? I can't show any of that. Just know that it happened and that this is not the last time that it will. In this world, as we find out from Genius, the girls all die before they turn 20 by something called moonbreaking. But a way to prevent this is by Yota having sex with them. And whenever Yota has sex with one of the girls, she will get a black ring around her neck. Well, most of the time, because as we see with the second girl, Lilia, sometimes the ring doesn't appear. We also find out from Genius that this is a curse from the jealous god. But the curse will be fully lifted if the god is killed. The beginning of this series sets up a pretty straightforward premise. All of the girls in this world will die unless Yota has sex with them or kills a jealous god. This can be handled pretty simply. Just have Yota kill the jealous god while having intercourse with 4 or 5 girls that helps him along his journey. You do not need to overcomplicate this, especially when the sex scenes are the main focus. Nobody watches porn for the plot, so why would you put a lot of effort into the story? But in the case of PP, I really hate that that's the abbreviation. The story gets crazy. After figuring out his goal and having an orgy with all of the guardians in the city, Yota continues on with Lumi to the city of Lille. Here, one of the guardians is under control of a witch by the name of Kai. Witches have been around for thousands of years and were once human, but by eating humans, they have gained immortality and can transform into monsters. Yota, Lumi, and the guardians of the town attempt to beat Kai, but the battle is far tougher than they can imagine because Kai will just keep regenerating unless they use her weakness against her, which the group doesn't know. And during this battle, Yota dies. Yota wakes up in a hospital bed on Earth, except he is missing his left arm and right leg from the defenestration that happened in Chapter 1. At his bedside is Nishina, and she asks why he jumped, which is strange because he didn't jump, he was thrown. Yota makes a promise to Nishina that he won't jump out of any more windows, but he can't shake the memories of the parallel world and uses his phone to research the witch's weakness. After discovering that her weakness is the sun, the puppet comes back. Yota leans out the window, but Nishina appears saying that she loves him and that he promised not to jump. Yota gets back into the room and the two embrace. Then, he is forcibly defenestrated once again by the doll, but this time, Nishina comes with him. Parallel Paradise has some interesting ideas. It being an isekai where the main character can travel between different worlds is pretty unique. Or at least I think it's unique. I don't know, I don't really watch isekai all that often. I know they do it in Digimon, but Digimon isn't exactly your typical isekai. But my point is that PP builds on the mysteries it set up in chapter 1 when you didn't even know there was a mystery. And things only get more complex when Yota dies for a second time. The second time Yota dies is immediately after leaving Lille. It happens because him and the gang get in a boat crash because they were too busy having sex. Cool. This time when Yota gets sent to his world, he is intubated. The doll appears again, but this time we are able to see its identity, and it is Lilia, the first girl who Yota had sex with that didn't get a black ring around her neck. Lilia says she is doing this because she loves him, and that this is the last time she can bring him back. And then she drops him from the window, saying, "Let's mate again." Ugh. Wait, how is Lilia in the human world? Does it have something to do with her not having a mark? Why didn't she say something to Yota when they were in the other world? Where's Nishina? Why didn't she get transported after she got defenestrated? There are so many questions, and they don't stop here. After Yota wakes up back in the parallel paradise, he is in a room where he is being forced to mate with the citizens of Sandorio so that they won't die from the moonbreaking. Yota, suffering from success. After managing to make his way out of the room, he looks out to discover that Sandorio is made up of skyscrapers, which is a far cry from the small villages that he has seen before. This leads him to the conclusion that the parallel world is actually Earth in the far future.
Are you kidding? What kind of fucking crack were they on when they came up with this?
I know I've been doing nothing but info dumping this entire time, but I need you to understand. This plot has twists and turns. It could have been so simple, but it's so complicated. Who in their right mind came up with this? Oh, that actually explains a lot. Normally, I like to start these videos by explaining who created the series, but I thought it would be more impactful if I buried the lead. Parallel Paradise was written by Lynn Okamoto, which might not ring any bells to you now, but I'm sure you have heard of another series he worked on called Elfen Lied. Elfen Lied is like if a 14-year-old watched Stranger Things and thought, you know what, I could make that better. But his idea of better was just to add in a ton of boobs. Elfen Lied is a great example of a show that people will defend as being good despite the overabundance of fan service. And I would agree that there is some good stuff here, but the whole thing feels like it's trying to be deep, but it's not quite accomplishing it. This video isn't about Elfen Lied, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I wanted to bring it up because Elfen Lied has some similarities to Parallel Paradise. You can tell that Parallel Paradise evolved from Elfen Lied. What I mean by this is that all of the elements of the earlier work are made bigger in the later work. There are a lot of boobs in Elfen Lied, full-blown sex scenes in Parallel Paradise. The main character has a traumatic backstory in Elfen Lied. The main character in PP has a traumatic backstory that is so big and so traumatic that it almost doesn't make sense. Trust me, we'll get there. And Elfen Lied has a complex plot too, but it isn't as complex as the one in PP. And the fact that the plot is so complex hurts it in the long run. I've been dancing around the fan service because what is there to say? It's sex. But the fan service is actually a huge detractor. Just hearing me outline the basic plot probably has you thinking that this series is good. But that's because I've been focusing on the important stuff and skipping over the fluff. The fluff being the lewd scenes. I'm going to take this time to illustrate what the fan service is like in this series. And to do that, we need to explain the differences between ecchi manga and hentai. I don't think I need to explain this, but when people in the West say hentai, they're talking about animated Japanese pornography. And in porn, the main focus is the sex. Now, in PP, you could argue that the main focus is the sex. So, this series is porn. Well, not exactly. You see, the big difference here is censorship. PP is a manga, so we can't get away with as much as we would if it was hentai. Manga are always censored in some way, whether they are ecchi or not. It just depends on the series how censored it ends up being. Some manga end up being fully censored where you can only get vague shapes or you have conveniently placed steam covering up the goods. And some manga have nipples on full display, which is a good line to draw when it comes to ecchi manga. But all manga, no matter how ecchi they are, don't show lower genitalia. This is the line that separates manga and hentai. So why am I bringing this up in this YouTube video? Well, Parallel Paradise is a manga. so it can't show lower genitalia. But the point of the series is for our main boy to have sex with every woman that he meets. But because of the nature of this being a manga, you can't see everything that you're supposed to. So what can you see? You can see nipples, that's fine, and you can see below the waist of the girls, but specific parts are being censored by the Fountain of Desire. And finally, you can see the reactions of the girls mid-act. This is referred to in Japanese as the ahagao. You may be familiar with this concept because the worst person you know owns this hoodie. Parallel Paradise is built on the back of the ahagao. This concept is what carries the sex scenes, because it's the only thing that we can have be different. There is a lot of sex in this series, and it all kind of blends together. Now, I am going to say this in all seriousness, but there are only so many positions. These scenes are tantalizing at the beginning of the series, but they get more tedious the more you keep reading. And they're only made more boring because you're only really getting half of the experience. That's why I said that the ahagao are doing the heavy lifting. And as this series taught me, I don't really like ahagao. It does nothing for me. So every scene, Yoda touches a girl, she goes into heat, begs for it, and then we get however many pages of basic positions, close-ups of the girl's face, and generic dialogue from Yota. This isn't compelling, especially when you compare it to the actual plot of the series. This is the perfect example of too much of a good thing. The sex gets old, and no matter how many partners get added or what different combinations you do, it doesn't make it more interesting. There was some promise with Urza, who is a masochist though. In her scene with Yoda, she cuts him with her scythe and pees on his face. Ugh. This is intense, but it does break up the monotony by adding in kinks. But moments like this are few and far between. Now, don't get me wrong, these scenes are still quote-unquote exciting, but because the plot is so good, there are moments when I wish the sex would stop and we would get back on track. This series is very repetitive, which doesn't help with a separate issue it has, which is its length. The series started in 2017 and is still ongoing to this day. It has around 300 chapters, which is insane because how the hell is this thing that long? Well, part of the problem stems from the repetition and the lewd scenes getting in the way. The basic plot pattern of PP is Yoda shows up to a new city. He meets the guardians of that city and has sex with them one after another. Yoda and his new guardian friends then fight a witch. Then Yoda finds out another thing he has to do in order to kill the jealous god, and finally, before he moves on to the next city, he has an orgy. This repeats ad nauseum throughout the whole story. Around chapter 100, I started to get the feeling that we were getting close to the end, but I knew that there were 280 chapters already, so I was feeling a sense of dread as it continued on. And even though we are already this many chapters in, the loop is still continuing. It feels like every time Yoda gets closer to his goal, he has something else that he has to deal with. It's like what happens when Mario gets to the end of a world in Super Mario Bros. But instead of your princess is in another castle, it's your plot is in another city. This is another problem I have with the fan service. It feels like the sex gets in the way of the plot. I don't want to watch Yoda have sex for the 50th time. I want to know what Lilia's deal is, because as we find out later, she's pregnant. I also want to know more about the Call, who I haven't brought up until now because they're gross. But apparently, they used to be human men. And also, Nishina's here now, and she was in stasis for centuries and was teased to be the jealous god. But it turns out she's not the jealous god, and it's actually this guy who Yoda used to know, and he killed Yoda's mom. Sex this, sex that, who cares? The moon is watching you, and nobody's talking about it. Parallel Paradise edges you on the plot so much. I guess it's fitting given the subject matter. But this is infuriating. The plot is well thought out, and there's some good stuff here, but I feel like it's wasted on this series. The fan service at the start felt like a nice treat that separated it from other manga, but as the story got fleshed out, all the loot scenes just got in the way. I want to see how this series ends. I want to know all the answers to this world, but I can't sit through another cycle of Yoda saving a city only for him to have to do it again 20 chapters later. This should have been over years ago. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out this other video I made about when anime get creative. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. And with that, sayonara.